Welcome back to the People Success Circle podcast, where we talk about what it really takes for people and organizations to thrive. This week's topic is a hot one, and it's one that makes people really uncomfortable. Today, we're digging into a tough but essential topic: pay transparency. What happens when we don't talk about compensation, and what happens when we do? And how do we even fix the hidden gaps that we often don't even know exist? I'm going to start off by telling you about my personal story with pay transparency. Back early in my career, this is in the early 90s, I was working for a big company, but a startup project within that company. And I had a position that was called an assistant manager, and I was one of many assistant managers. They had hired many of us because they anticipated growing. And so we had a pretty big training cohort. One day, I was sitting at breakfast with 3 male assistant managers. The 4 of us were sitting at breakfast and just having general conversation, like about when were they going to open new locations and what did our career and training look like? And all of a sudden, one of the men said something about having a hard time living off the salary that he was making. And the other guys were nodding and were like, yeah, this is a really low amount. I took a pay cut because I believed in this opportunity. And when they said what they were making, just very openly, I froze because I was making 31% less than the 3 men at the table who were doing the exact same job that I was. And I was barely making ends meet. I had a college degree. I had great intern experience. And even though it was my first kind of real job, I had as much experience as the 3 men sitting at this breakfast table. We were at Denny's and everything was great until the conversation turned to pay. And I stopped and I said to them, wait a minute, you guys make that? And they were like, yeah, isn't it kind of stink? We all kind of took a pay cut. And I was like, oh my goodness, you guys, I make so much less than you. And they were like, you need to go and ask for more. That's really not fair. So I did. I slept on it. I was so stressed about it and really hurt because I was doing a great job. I was easily doing as great of a job as the 3 men sitting at the table. So I did think about it for a few days. I called my mentor and talked to her, and she coached me on how to have the conversation. Well, this was quite a while ago. And when I had the conversation with the male HR director, he said they're the breadwinners. And I said, they're not like married with kids or anything yet. And he said, yes, but men are typically the breadwinners. So when I set pay, that's what I think about. And my jaw dropped to the floor, but I didn't know what to do. And so he said, I'm sorry, Mindy, I'm not going to be able to raise your rate. If you want to make more, you're going to have to work really hard to get promoted. And so I had a decision to make. I knew that this felt miserable. And I also knew that I liked the company, I liked the job, and I saw that growth potential. So I made the decision to stay. And to make a long story short, I actually did end up getting promoted several times and actually surpassed those 3 men sitting at the table with me, both in seniority and I'm sure eventually in pay as well. And I had a great career with the company, but that soured my taste on just equity and what it means to have pay discrepancies in the workplace. And, I was a victim of it myself. And then I went into human resources and I was just so passionate about making sure that did not happen to other women, to other minorities, and to people who truly deserved equal pay. Everybody deserves equal pay. That moment actually lit a fire in me. It helped me see that lack of pay transparency leads to inequity and that it's not always intentional. Sometimes people just don't ask, and sometimes leaders just don't tell. But the result is really the same: people being undervalued without even knowing that they have the potential to make more in their position. Transparency builds trust and it empowers people to speak up. Without it, we rely on luck, accidentally overhearing it at the Denny's breakfast table with your peers. And we know now that companies that lead with pay clarity are more likely to close wage gaps, they have a reduction of turnover, and they attract stronger, more loyal talent to the organization. I want to give you a few more reasons why pay transparency does matter in the United States. So, like I said, it fosters trust and equity, and it also helps us to break down bias. Currently, in 2025, in the United States, women earn 84% of what men earn, and Black and Hispanic workers earn even less. They earn 76 cents and 73 cents on the dollar, respectively. And these pay gaps just continue to persist. Nearly a third of companies report losing talent due to unfair pay. And there are laws emerging all the time around the U.S. In fact, today, 14 states, as well as the District of Columbia, have pay transparency laws in place. In 2025, we're adding 4 more states to that. So we'll have 18 states and the District of Columbia requiring salary range disclosure. In addition to that, there's even 10 more states that have the legislation in review currently. And on the federal landscape, we have 22 states that have banned an employer from asking about someone's salary history, because we know that when they ask about salary history, then they try to set pay based on the person's history instead of what the position actually is worth. One of the main reasons why pay transparency is so important is because it improves someone's financial well-being. The Gallup organization has established that there are 5 pillars for employee and really personal well-being, and one of them is financial well-being. And so a company can contribute to someone's financial well-being by clearly talking about total compensation, as well as having pay guidelines and salary bands so someone knows what their growth potential is in their current role and in the roles above them if they were to be developed and if they were to get promoted. Just that sheer knowledge of what the pay bands are and what total compensation is in a way that people truly understand the value of their position, just knowing that helps someone have financial peace of mind and helps them to stress less and be more engaged at work. When someone is always worrying when the next pay raise is going to be or what the salary band is for the next position, they are distracted from their everyday work. And so the goal is to minimize distraction and to be just honest and upfront about the compensation philosophy for the organization, the salary guidelines for that band, and anything above it, because it also can help someone want to get promoted and want to really try to engage to be a great performer if they know that there is salary potential at the next level. So it really does help that financial well-being, and it also reinforces growth pathways and reduces that financial anxiety. So how does a company start implementing pay transparency? If it's the law, then they have to, but there's a way to do it that's really productive and really helpful for the organization. And that is to start with a compensation philosophy. One of the first things I do when I meet with a company to help them determine pay guidelines for their organization is to start with creating a compensation philosophy. We need to sit down as a leadership team and figure out where they want to be as they benchmark with national, state, and local companies who do the same thing. We also want to look at what the performance guidelines are for each role and what the expectations are, because once people know that, they know how to strive for the biggest increase or for the promotion. When we're really clear about expectations for each role in the company and the pay that goes with it, people know what they're striving for. And that's what we want. We want people to be focused on upward mobility or just even strengthening the skills that they have in their current role. The next thing we do is figure out pay ranges. So this takes a lot of research, and I typically do this for companies in partnership with their human resources team. We typically buy a salary survey, and they have them for every industry out there. We look at pay guidelines nationally, by state, and by county. And it's not just the pay comparison to all other companies. It really is companies that do the same thing that you do, that are about the same size, and they have the same total revenue. So it's really trying as much as we can to compare apples to apples. This is done by comparing each and every position within the company. Then we establish 3 categories for each position: the minimum pay, the midpoint, and the maximum. And so typically what happens is we gather all this research and then we say, based on the compensation philosophy, where do we want to be? Do we want to be in the middle? Do we want to be low? Do we want to be towards the mid to high? So we really have a lot of discussion on where we want our employees to fall within that band. So that research piece is key. Even after doing the initial research, I recommend companies do updates annually or at the very least every 2 years. We know cost of living has gone up, the economy changes, and so it is important to not just research once, but to reevaluate that every year or 2 at the most. Once we have the pay guidelines that we want to implement, we then analyze where every employee is within their band for their position. And when we do this, we are looking for equity. So we're looking at gender, we're looking at race, we're looking at seniority, we're looking at performance, and we want to fix any unexplained gaps. It's really important to do this because when we publish these, we don't want them to have questions about where they fit in the range. We want it to be very clear. And so it's important to fix any discrepancies when you're establishing compensation guidelines. This is not something you have to do often, because once you implement it and you kind of level set to make sure people are paid appropriately in the beginning, generally it's easy to make sure that you maintain that over time. So we want to equip the managers with tools and scripts on how to have these compensation discussions, how to roll out the compensation philosophy and the compensation guidelines internally. And I say that because we want to do it well. We don't want to just publish something and leave people to figure it out on their own. An effective rollout is key. And probably the most important thing you can do is to communicate with your internal employees before you ever put it on an external job posting or before you ever discuss that with an external hire. And the reason I say that is because a lot of companies think, okay, it's the law now that I have to put salary on the job posting, so I'm just going to stick one on there. And they do that oftentimes before ever telling their current employees what their position is valued at. And you can imagine the drama and just the feelings that can be hurt by seeing something publicly when they didn't even know what the min, mid, and max for their position was. And so it's really important, I can't stress enough, for companies to take care of the communication and the rollout with their internal employees before they ever post it externally on a job posting. And it's just so important to make sure that we do that right. I do strongly recommend that when a company is rolling out compensation guidelines, that they roll it out with total compensation in mind. So many people think of their salary only, and they don't necessarily know how much a company puts into 401k or 403b. They don't necessarily put a value on benefits or vacation or tuition reimbursement and all those other things. So I think this is a great time to talk about total compensation in addition to actual salary. I also want to clarify that pay transparency doesn't mean sharing what someone makes. It doesn't mean that you as an organization disclose everyone's pay. It means that you disclose what the pay bands are for everyone to see. Now, many states now prohibit us from telling an employee that they can't talk about salary. It's not every state, but there are many states out there who actually say, employers, you can't tell your employees not to talk about pay anymore, because they know that by talking about it, we increase the chances of having equity. So it's important for you to know that you really can't discourage people from talking about their pay to someone else, but you definitely don't disclose someone's pay to someone else. So I often hear employers go, "Ugh, I do not want to do pay transparency. I know it's just opening a can of worms." And I'll tell you the truth. It actually reduces the amount of chatter about pay in the workplace. When people have that ambiguity, they tend to talk about it and wonder, and they get distracted. And when it's laid out very clearly, there actually isn't as much to talk about. And so those conversations happen in private with their supervisor as far as like, how could I get a raise? The supervisor now has the tool to show the comp guidelines as well as the role expectations and the performance guidelines. And that gives them a clear roadmap to discuss with their employees how they can get a raise. The other thing that I say to employers who are hesitant to roll out pay transparency is to remember why this is happening. The reason why we want to talk about pay transparency is to reduce inequity, to bridge those pay gaps that we know are happening, and to increase the employee's chance to understand what they need to do to get a promotion or a raise. As employers, we owe this to our employees so that we can be a great place to work and that we can make sure that we are equitable in every way possible. So now, if you're listening to this and you're an employee or you're a job seeker, I'm going to give you some tips too. Don't be afraid to ask, what is the pay range for this role? Whether you're applying for a new role or whether you're currently in the organization, it's important for you to know that you have every right to ask what the pay potential is for the role that you're doing. Next, talk to your boss openly about this. Real conversations can lead to real change. If you work for a company that doesn't have established pay guidelines, ask what the role expectations are, what the performance guidelines are, and ask them to be as clear as possible about what it takes for you to perform well in your role so that you can have the maximum earning potential. And last but not least, use the tools that are out there to help you understand what your position is worth. You can use things like salary.com. They have a salary calculator there, glassdoor.com. And you can also look for a similar position posted in a state that does mandate salary posting. So like I always use Denver, Colorado as an example. In Denver, you have to post what the position pays on the job description. So if you're applying for a job in Texas for a pharmaceutical sales rep for a company, you could look to see if that company has pharmaceutical sales rep jobs posted in Denver. And because Denver has to post the range, but Texas doesn't. And so you can be creative with figuring out like, what is the range for this job? And you may not find the same posting for the exact company and the exact job, but find something similar. Just collect information about what job pays. I encourage job seekers to have a thorough researched answer when someone asks them what their salary expectations expectation is in an interview. That would be that they have looked up what this job pays in the industry, whether it be nationally or locally, what it pays in the cost of living where they are. So, it certainly pays more in New York City than it does in Peoria, Illinois. So factoring in cost of living, and then factoring in the experience and the education that they bring to that role. When someone comes prepared to answer what their salary expectation is with research, they have a higher chance of getting what they need. And if you're already an employee working for an organization, like I said, you have every right to ask what the pay guidelines are for your role. So if this podcast sparked an interest for you in learning more about setting pay guidelines for your organization, then I want you to just remember the why behind it. It promotes transparency and reduces bias in hiring, promotions, and raises, which is so important. We want women and diverse populations to be paid fairly, and we want to reduce that gap with every hire and every promotion that we make. I also encourage you to research your state laws and the upcoming laws, because whether or not you are ready to roll out pay transparency at your organization, you might legally have to do it. So you want to do it well. You want to roll out pay guidelines that are well researched, scripts for your managers, and the tools and resources to help your company do it so that everyone feels very valued. I want to wrap up this episode with some action steps. If you are a leader, an HR professional, or a business owner, I want to challenge you to research the pay and transparency laws for your state and think about whether this is something that you need to work on for your organization. If so, please reach out. I have several years of experience establishing pay guidelines for companies, and I would love to help you learn how to do this the right way. Next, if you're a job seeker or an employee, your action step is to ask about salary ranges and benefits. Make sure that you fully understand total compensation and you understand the performance metrics for your job. And for everyone else, I want to make sure that you share this episode and leave a review if this taught you something that helped you further understand pay. It's important to spread the word about this and to get this information in the hands of people who make pay decisions so that we can improve pay equity. I also want to remind you that if you go to the show notes, you can download the free guide, the People Success Circle Playbook. And this will walk you through how to elevate the people side of your business. That lunch table conversation showed me that without talk, inequity hides. Transparency is more than just compliance. It's equity, trust, and empowerment. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week on the People Success Circle podcast.